Thank you to everyone who's already in the room. We're just waiting for the rest of the folks to file in virtually. It takes a minute or two for everyone to get connected. So thank you for your patience. We'll get underway momentarily. Just going to wait a few more moments here. There's still people connecting to the room. So thank you all for your patience. We'll get started here in a minute. Thank you everyone for your patience. We're just going to give everyone a few more minutes as they continue to join. We'll be underway shortly.
Okay, Mark, I think we're good to start.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for joining us for today's session. My name is Mark LaFleur with Wirewheel, and I'll be emceeing this discussion. Before I introduce your speakers for this session, I'd just like to cover off a few quick housekeeping items. Everyone should see a quick poll question on your screen. If you'd like to go ahead and submit an answer, please do so. Also, please note that the views expressed here today by our panelists are their own and not the views of their organizations. And last but not least, we've had a really fantastic participation in all of these sessions. We hope that continues. So please feel free to take advantage of the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit questions. And as an added incentive, we'll be giving out free Spokes t-shirts to the first 5 attendees that submit a question. So with that, we're very excited to have a fantastic lineup of experts for you today. Dan Frank is a principal at Deloitte. Zach Murphy is a senior manager at T-Mobile. Dimitri Sirota is CEO and co-founder of Big ID. And moderating today's session is Wirewheel CEO, Justin Antoni Pillay. Justin, please take it away, and I'll come back at the end to help wrap things up.
Terrific. Mark, thanks so much for starting our conversation today. Dan, Zach, Dimitri, welcome. Thanks for joining us at Spokes 2020. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I'll be both a moderator and a participant, luckily. And we've had some really thoughtful panels over these last couple of days. As you know, we've really brought Spokes together as a conference to bring to the community the ability to focus on the most critical issues that are on the minds of the privacy and technology community. We focused on those core, few issues, and then we tried to bring some of the best experts that we know in these critical areas. So there's just a handful of panels, but we've had an incredible reaction from the community over these last few days. And even just this morning, to hear from European policymakers about where they see the focus over the next couple of years. The clear message out of Europe, Ireland, UK was, we're not stopping our focus on human rights and data protection. Even in the face of a shutdown, this is meaningful for our human beings around the world. And we're going to keep we're going to keep enforcing, we're going to keep pushing, and that was a very clear message. In our privacy leaders panel today, to hear some of the most significant folks at some of the largest companies talk about what privacy and the civil rights movement have meant and some of the bigger human rights issues, you realize that our community is wrapped up into so many big movements around the world. And that's what I think brings us, together. Our national security panel had some of the leading experts in national security. And a lot of what they talked about was that there's a huge explosion in innovation and in data in the private sector in a way that might have 20 years ago been driven by DARPA or driven out of defense or intelligence budgets. And so not only is some of the craziest innovation coming in the private sector, but the data sets sit with the private sector. And that changes the way intelligence and national security agencies think about their jobs. So you can see it's part of that movement. Today's panel on technology and privacy is meant to bring to our participants today some very practical insights from leading experts into what does it really mean to automate? What does it mean to bring technology to privacy challenges? And what is meaningful in terms of actually starting to move forward and using different kinds of technology? Because of course, there's a real proliferation in offerings out there. There's words that you see on websites that say, we automate, we have bots, we have AI. And the goal of today's session is really to work with experts who are out in the field, who are actually implementing privacy programs and who are looking at different technologies and bring that insight to our community. So what I thought we'd start with, obviously, Dan, you and the Deloitte team have a very broad view and have been implementing and helping companies implement privacy programs. Zach, you are one of the senior leaders at a huge, very trusted provider and keeper of data. And we'd love to hear from you in a few minutes about where are you bringing technology into place to help save your team time and money, which of course, if there's anything on the minds of our privacy community right now, it's how do you do more with less? We're all under budget constraints. We've all seen the consequences to our budgets as the shutdown. So how are you really running a privacy program? And what technologies are you bringing to tackle that ROI? And then Dimitri and myself will both talk about our own technology solutions where we're seeing benefits to companies from an ROI perspective over the next couple of quarters, and being conscious of what our company's needs really are. But I thought I'd start with you, Dan, having seen, and helping companies of all sizes. Obviously you work with huge enterprises as well at Deloitte. When you hear the question, what does automation mean? Obviously that's a very broad topic. But if you could lay out for us some of the maybe 1, 2, or 3 areas where you're seeing companies really bring in technology and really bring in automation, that would be a great way for us to start the conversation. So Dan?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And Justin, thanks for having me. Privacy technology is obviously coming out of the woodwork, right? There's literally hundreds, if not thousands of different, technologies that have come out, just in the last several years. And most, if not all, of your historically manual privacy program capabilities, components, et cetera, you can introduce technology into in some way, shape, or form, right? However, if I had to pick 3, per your question there, certainly the records of processing is a fundamental tenet of any privacy program. And I think over the last 3 to 5 years, what we've seen is Excel, SharePoint, unstructured kind of format for maintaining that records of processing, which is not sustainable in the future, right? The business and technology are changing on an hourly, weekly, monthly, basis. Very hard to maintain that, right, in that fashion. So certainly the data discovery and cataloging piece I would see as kind of fundamental tenet if you don't get that piece right, it's very difficult to get the other pieces right. The other two that I would, I guess, pick, one would be preference and consent management, right? Given the fact that third-party cookies are going away, right? And you're going to have to rely on first-party data. And given that I think leading organizations are shifting from a quote-unquote compliance-driven program to one that's built more on data ethics and consumer trust, the need to have fine-grained preference, and consent management to garner, consumer trust, right? To motivate them, right? To give you more of their data, more control over their data and use and so forth would be the second piece. And then the third would be obviously around individual rights requests. Perhaps the most burdensome of the CCPA and GDPR, requirements, right, was the access request fulfillment and deletion requests, fulfillment. That's, if you're utilizing a manual approach to that, right, where you just spray the request out to dozens, hundreds, thousands of system owners and ask them to, produce, that data file, then you got to manually combine all the data together, et cetera. That's just not sustainable, right, at all. And it's only going to get worse as CCPA-like laws replicate across the US, GDPR-like laws replicate globally. That volume of requests is just going to keep coming up. So that's the third area that I would say is critical for technology enablement.
Yeah, and that's great. And obviously, we're lucky enough to be working together on a lot of these from both the expertise and the technology side on a lot of those issues. But why don't I pivot over to Zach? So Zach, here you are at T-Mobile. You're one of the senior managers. You're actually helping to implement privacy programs, and you again, the records of processing, the assessments, the DSARs. These are really significant pain points for companies. Where are you seeing real benefits, Zach, from bringing automation and technology, and what has it meant when you guys at T-Mobile are starting to automate?
Yeah, sure. So I can kind of help by telling the story. So we started off with, an unknown universe of what does our portfolio of applications look like? Where does our record of processing live? We had, shadow IT, we had complementary IT, and trying to identify all of those different assets and really nail down what are they doing was a significant lift for the organization. So within that, we started to really decompose that back to grassroots at the database level. So essentially, we took business elements and we actually mapped those by their business processing activities, ultimately cataloging those into a central repository, which give us the ability to manage policies centrally. So for example, at a flip of a switch, I can actually descope an application right now in my existing platform, have them either A, respond or not respond to a delete or access request. Part of that in our automation platform, we actually looked at various technologies to really bring in what is orchestration and how to actually use a pub sub model, which is publication and subscription. So essentially an application says, queries a area, I'll just kind of keep it high level, and says, do you have any requests for me? And the application goes back with, yes, I do have a request for you. Here are these 5 requests, please process. So overnight they'll go through, they'll actually process that. The human being element that we identified, so when we launched, we had whittled our 1,700 applications down to around 54 applications. We launched with 11 of those automated, and over the last 6 months, we actually automated all of our applications and eliminating that human being querying the database to the application, querying a framework and saying, okay, this is my response, please process this. Come back to our key technology in this platform is WireWheel, and WireWheel takes and brings this all together so that we don't have to manipulate the data files coming back. And we present not only to the consumer a set of their personal information, but also something that's easy to read. We use the PDF technology, which is critical to our automation. And part of that technology presents the business elements so that it's not some hashtag of values, it's human readable information. Does it make sense to the consumer? Because we really doubled down on our core values, which is, customer comes first, we're a customer driven company. And we wanted to make sure that that information was beneficial to the people behind the scenes. And we've actually quantified how many the dollars that we're being able to actually save using just overhead, standard mechanics there. And $475,000 per year per application are our net savings. So we're able to present that to our leadership team and say, yep, this is the value of automating. Not only does it increase or decrease our overhead costs associated with that, but it also increases the quality. So we have system mechanics to ensure that it's complete and accurate data, as opposed to a human being can make mistakes.
Zach, I mean, the way you covered it too, you sort of taken the DSAR problem and you, as you were walking through it, broke it down into a couple of elements that I think, if you don't mind me unpacking for a moment, are really important in thinking about automating DSAR. Because the way we have worked together with T-Mobile was to think about the challenge in steps and then to automate each step in a way that we can repeat it and scale it. But you covered it in a really thoughtful way. So you have, for example, the critical step of verification, right? And there's ways that you need to verify who the individual is. You all had thought through the different back-end systems. And so we had to think about the multi-tenant nature of going to retrieve the data, which can be very, very hard. And you described that, but that is a scalable process that actually can bring huge savings to the broader community if you think about that retrieval concept. You just covered the third idea, which is you have to compile the data, and it often looks like a mess. Dimitri and Dan and I might describe it in different ways, but it's not readable to a human being. So you have to rationalize it and actually get that data to look like something you feel proud of. And then that whole making it look good is a very important thing that we've automated through the right code. And finally, you at T-Mobile had implemented kind of data cataloging, and we were able to leverage that, as part of the ROPA process, which I think is an important concept here.
Yep. And to the scaling ability, as everyone knows who's watching the news, we just merged with Sprint. We're bringing in a whole new set of applications. We're using the same framework. We're able to leverage these existing investments and simplify the process. So it really is a plug and play model. Whenever we change the business, we can centrally manage policies as well as onboard applications at the flip of a dime.
Yeah, well, look, we're excited to be working with you, and we want to share that knowledge the way that you all have conceived of it, because the level of automation on DSARs has been really, really impressive. So we'll come back to that point in a minute, Zach. Dimitri, when we talk about automating data discovery, it was one of the items that Dan talked about. Wirewheel and Big ID have been working together on what Wirewheel does, which we'll cover in a minute, and what Big ID does. But if you hear about the question about automating data discovery, what does that mean to you? And how do you react to things like bots and other advertisements in that area?
Sure. So I think it means a couple of things to me. So first off, I think it's important to also highlight the difference between kind of discovery for privacy and discovery that people develop for things like PCI and PHI, right? So a lot of the tools that exist in the marketplace today for data discovery were developed in a different era when a data landscape looked different and to solve slightly different problems. You talk about DSARs, they weren't meant to be able to find PI, they weren't meant to be able to tell you whose data versus what data, they weren't meant to be able to look across a modern data landscape that includes AWS and Azure and Salesforce and ServiceNow and Zendesk and Slack, et cetera. And so for us, the idea of automation has a couple of aspects. So one is just being able to automatically pick out the data and make sense of the data as it pertains to a person. So for the set of privacy problems, and Dan kind of hit on those three use cases around ROPA, around DSAR, and there was the other one. It's important to think about discovery as being different and doing that automatically across 54 systems or 5,400 systems is critical. Now, the other aspect around automation is really about how do you onboard those systems rapidly, right? I think it's challenging with 50 systems. It's more challenging with 5,000 systems. and being able to discover that and figure out what's the best way of looking in this file share. Maybe it's Office 365. What's the best way of me looking inside a Snowflake or Databricks or Confluent, which is all these kind of terms that may mean nothing to the average privacy professional, but again, to an IT person, they all have unique idiosyncrasies. And how do you create automation for both finding those systems, and then secondly, being able to automatically figure out how best do I connect to that system, because a tool like Databricks is very, very different from Kafka, very different from Snowflake, very different from AWS, very different from Salesforce. Now, in terms of bots and other types of kind of process automation, I think as a privacy professional, there's different things that you want to be able to get insight from the data. One is you want to be able to power your DSAR, you want to be able to do your ROPA, you want to be able to do other kind of aspects of kind of day-to-day privacy activity. And I think what you want is something to make it easy to be able to locate all the data belonging to a particular individual in a particular region, maybe even in a file or in a data warehouse or in a data lake or in SAP. And so that's also an aspect of automation where you want to make it easier to be able to inform the system of what information you're able to extract, and the system is intelligent enough to be able to do just that. So I would say, again, borrowing Dan's kind of three model, there's three aspects, again, to the whole data discovery automation. Being able to understand and automate how you onboard systems, being able to automate how you find data that belongs to a particular individual. And then lastly, being able to get the type of insights you need for privacy, security, and risk and compliance.
Yeah, that helps a lot, Dimitri. And maybe I'll focus in the same way on some of the framings that Dan started with, and then we can circle back. So when we see companies struggling with, for example, DSAR, we see the same kind of challenges day to day. But number one, there's some basic problems that are on the minds of companies. One is you need the basic privacy infrastructure in which to handle a DSAR. And no matter if you're a small company or a large company, it has to be enterprise grade. In other words, you need in that privacy infrastructure, enterprise grade encryption. You need the ability to make sure you know who's coming into the system and out, right? The ability to have multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. These are almost thought of as table stakes, but when we stand back and you think about data subject access, you're basically giving a person back some of this very sensitive personal information. And there's, for our entire privacy community, a very long list of things that you have to have that are table stakes. Are you SOC 2 compliant? If you're a company that has any operations in Europe, are you Privacy Shield certified? Do you have the infrastructure to be able to create events and the compliance records behind it? These are part of that really important, what we think of at Wirewheel as privacy infrastructure that you can't take for granted, because the worst thing is you implement some solution and you don't have a secure environment, you don't have roles-based access control, there's no SOC 2. This is stuff you just have to have. And then when we look at the day-to-day of actually fulfilling DSARs, the automation we look at usually starts with, can you at least do all of the workflow components? Because a lot of companies, they just want to make sure they're doing the ability to collect in that way, but then have a maturity model that matches what Zach, you were talking about. Are you able to onboard a lot of systems quickly? Is it scalable? Do you have a model where you can onboard data into a tool and a platform that does data discovery like Big ID and have a system that's working between them? And that's where we have thought about not only privacy infrastructure that's secure and has that enterprise grade level of protections, but also the ability to quickly scale it out by integrating with a lot of systems through code. And we've seen some really, really valuable automation coming in there. when you have abstracted it down to the day-to-day problems for DSAR, which are often, what is the infrastructure? How do you verify the person? And then how do you scalably collect and onboard the data into a system? But they, so that's the consumer facing side of things. But we see a lot of pain day to day in the privacy world among the, say, participants that are joining us here today. And, I know, Dan, you see this day to day, and Dimitri, Zach, certainly this is a pain point in creating the records of processing and creating that core data privacy office. The day-to-day life of a privacy officer is find the system, know what's in the system, assess it, and create that record behind it. And it can be painful because the information that you need to do your job, if you're, in Zach's seat and doing it day to day, that information about the systems is often stuck in the minds of people all around your organization, or it's stuck in your stack. What is the system? What is the data? Who is it being shared with? And so leveraging your systems and bringing automation, certainly right now where all of us have budget pressure, is really important. So Zach, on the question that, and then maybe we'll come back to Dan and then Dimitri. Zach, first, when you thought about really trying to bring automation to the day-to-day of an assessment, PIA, a DPIA, those kind of assessment-based models, what are you doing to try to save money right now at this time of budget pressure?
Yep, so we're looking at a wide variety of technologies. We look to some of the technologies out there give us the ability to correlate data. So for example, you have just imagine a spreadsheet, if you will, and you've got social security numbers in one spreadsheet, you got social security numbers in another spreadsheet. There are technologies out there that can actually start to correlate things across disparate data sources. And if you know what the business context is for an application, and you can correlate its connection and its data flow down through, we use scanning technology to find out where data is flowing downstream. You can say, well, this is most likely being used to identify a person. It's most likely being used to market to an individual, and therefore it may most likely be in scope to be deleted from the database at this downstream endpoint. So we use technologies to scan for that. We look for metadata. We are also driving towards automation of governance. So we can actually apply policies. So when they do the privacy impact assessment, we can actually then correlate that into our central catalog of ROPA. We don't now know that they have a new database or that they have database X, Y, and Z. They then fill out a form that then goes back into our centralized database for policies with the processing activity. So you can go from soup to nuts essentially on what they were doing and the data being flown, or the data lineage and where it is flowing to.
That's terrific, Zach. And those automation tools around those assessments, I think, can be critical. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Dan, when you're seeing the day-to-day help and automation around running a privacy office, the ROPAs, the PIAs, where are you seeing some benefits for companies meaningfully?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of them come to mind, Justin. One is just reduced labor costs, right? Kind of labor in your core privacy function, labor if you've got like champion stewards, et cetera, that are in business units and business functions, and certainly IT due to process automation, right? That's one return that you're likely going to get if you do technology enablement right. Risk reduction is kind of a no-brainer, right? I think manual processes are more susceptible to human error. They're more susceptible to meeting deadlines in terms of timelines that you need to do certain things. A big one that I would I guess highlight last, Justin, is around business enablement, right? So if you introduce the type of automation that we've been talking about into your program, right, you're going to get the business the data that they need to bring new products, new services, new apps, et cetera, faster to the market, right? It's going to allow you to market, to advertise, to do data analytics, create a more personalized, consumer experience, et cetera. Is there a hard dollar value that you can put on that, kind of black and white, snap of the finger type of thing? No. But it is measurable quantitatively, right? Which is why kind of the business and risk reporting component of technology enablement is so important, right? Because if you introduce a variety of these technologies to automate, but nobody in the organization realizes the benefits, you're likely to get more scrutiny, right, for what you have spent and what you want to spend. So once you've got technologies to enable, all these different areas, being able to pull out the data from them and the metrics from them, right, to demonstrate tangible value, I think is critically important. The last thing I'll say, picking up a little bit on what Dimitri was talking about earlier, the whole topic of using artificial intelligence and machine learning in privacy is fascinating to me, and I think we might see a switch to that in the near term. And what I mean by that is organizations use AI and ML for lots of things right now, right? But one of the things that I don't see many organizations, if any, using it for is analyzing the data that they have from a privacy perspective. You know what I mean? Analyzing the data around customer opt-ins, opt-outs. How frequently are they doing it? How can we encourage more opting in and less opting out based upon machine learning around those tendencies? Who's submitting access requests? Why? How frequently? How can we prevent those requests from being submitted proactively? Again, by looking in trends in the data. Who's opting into first-party cookies? How can we give the consumer or get the consumer to give us more information to personalize their experience, right? You have to look at the data that's being spat out of all these privacy technologies to do that analysis, right, for your benefit. So I think the use of AI and ML in the future is also a way that you're going to see return on investment for these privacy technologies.
That makes sense, Dan. And Dimitri, over to you. Where are you seeing folks apply a data discovery approach and really save money, especially at this time?
Sure. So I'll talk about a few things. So just purely looking at privacy, I think Gartner has quoted a number of roughly $1,400 per DSAR request, fairly expensive. And you can look at automation as being able to reduce that to almost nothing, right? If you do the automation correctly, you can manage the full workflow from request, maybe preference management, which is another thing Dan talked about, all the way through to finding out all the fragments of data on different systems, correlating it back, and customize. So again, you can reduce that to nothing. And and I know that with some of our large customers, they have many thousands of requests. So that's one area. In a similar vein, I think the exercise that you have to do traditionally around things like privacy impact assessments or an assessment could be time consuming, require you to send out interviews and questionnaires. If there's ways to close the books, if you will, anytime you want, because you have accounting software, and in this case, it'd be data accounting software. So you know where the data is. You don't have to ask everybody where they think the data is. That also helps. Now that's just narrowly cast on privacy. What we're also seeing increasingly is people don't want different technologies in privacy, security, and data governance. They want a single source of data truth that spans all of them. So security professionals may care about understanding where their crown jewels are, whether it's people data, customer data, patent data, health data. In a similar vein, data governance folks and data management folks care about getting value from that data. And so one of the things that we promote is this idea that you could have a single source of truth, maybe a different lens. So maybe data governance folks care about the metadata. Maybe security folks care about data classification and understanding types of data and sensitivity. Maybe data privacy folks want to understand who the data belongs to. But the idea of being able to unify that helps reduce cost. And that promotion of this idea that data is the beginning part of multiple journeys, not just privacy, but also security, also data governance, also cloud migration is something that we've had a lot of success with. And something that we're promoting more and more.
That makes a lot of sense too, Dimitri. And when we're thinking about the challenges that our profession has, like companies have, we're often trying to think about how do we bring not only ROI right now, but how are we there to grow with you over the next couple of years? So when we take again the framing that we started with, a lot of the challenges in our that we're seeing with companies are around managing the entire privacy personal experience for your customers. So when WireWheel customers, the way we've tried to think about it, and when people ask me, what does WireWheel do? What does WireWheel do? We usually think of it as two big sets of challenges. When our customers are trying to improve their overall privacy user experience with their customers, from first touch all the way to the last touch, when you show up at a website, do you get the information in a way that you understand it? Is it telling the trust story for your company? That's something that we have a solution for, because we want a company, we want a privacy office to be able to tell the story of how they are good custodians of the data. And that's part of our platform, is helping a privacy office stand up those beautiful interactive experiences. And part of the reason we thought of that was, if you go to most of your companies and you ask them what matters to you in terms of selling your product, what matters to you in terms of your relationship with your customers, trust really matters. And many of our customers, when you go to their privacy website, they're built like they were built in 1998 when the internet, when you first had an old version of Internet Explorer, right? It tells a very legalistic version of the story. So providing a user experience that a non-technical person can actually publish something that tells that story is part of what we provide. And then creating a user experience from that first touch through consent and preference management, through even access and collection of data, in a way that your customers can interact with that, and you can tell a story that, hey, trust me with your data, because you can get it back, you can delete it. That entire first touch to last touch is a technical infrastructure we have built for our customers that can work for the largest customers in the world, but we also tried to democratize that so that you have an enterprise grade automation platform for your first customer touch to the last one. That's one of the things we've really focused on. But that means, as Zach was saying, that means when you're thinking about it, one portion of that, like I care about DSAR, we can bring a huge ROI through automation. And we've seen companies that focus on that problem where you can actually automate the DSAR process minimally or maximally and save an enormous amount. So Dimitri, I agree that automating that first touch to last touch with your customers with their own data, there's an enormous amount of opportunity there that people, I think a lot of our customers are currently doing manually, that you can actually make it quite cost effective in the way that we've done it, for example, with Zach's team. But the other part of it where I'm very empathetic to our privacy community, as I mentioned, is just running your privacy office. And there is, the collection of information, Dimitri, I agree with you, Dan and Zach. Part of the information you have to collect when you're doing these assessments is from the stack. It's like, what data do you have, Dimitri, is a question we get asked all the time. What data do you have? But parts of the challenge of privacy professionals also relies on information that you have to gather from people. Right now, at least, right? We're not at the point where you can gather all of that from the stack. What are you using it for? Why are you collecting that data? The why question, I bet Zach and Dan, is one of the things you do every day. And giving somebody an automation platform, this is again what we do, an automation platform where you can gather that human information more efficiently is often a very big pain point for our community. Dan, I don't know if you've seen that, or Zach, but it's painful.
Yeah. No, I was just going to jump in. What you said and what Dimitri said also made me think of another way to drive and demonstrate ROI. And how you do that, right, is not to think about technology enablement solely for your purposes, right? You as the chief privacy officer. If you think about this more holistically from a data risk perspective, right? When we talk about data risk, we talk about data governance, data privacy, and data protection. You can integrate all the technologies that we've talked about, right, into a cohesive, kind of integrated platform. And in doing so, you can provide benefits to virtually every business function within the organization. And if you do that, right, you've now doubled, tripled, quadrupled, quintupled the business functions and business leaders that are going to be willing to fund your technology enablement. The privacy office and process automation is a no-brainer, benefit to all those that are on the call. But when you think about the other stakeholders that have a vested interest in this, right? Your chief data officer has a vested interest, right, in having strong data discovery and data cataloging capabilities, right? They own data governance. Your CIO has a vested interest in technology automation or enablement because it's their responsibility to put the technical means in place to respond to access requests and deletion requests. On the business side of things, you've got your chief marketing officer, your chief advertising officer, chief digital officer, chief analytics officer, right? They have a vested interest in the integration of these technologies because they starve, right? They hunger for that consumer data to bring new products, new services, new tech, whatever it may be, to the marketplace for business benefits. And they know without this stuff, right? Without a comprehensive understanding of consumer data that discovery and cataloging brings, without strong, fine-grained preference and consent management, individual rights management that garners consumer trust, that they're not going to get that data and they're not going to be able to use it, to innovate. So when you think about ROI, don't just think about how you can demonstrate ROI from a privacy function perspective. Think about your teammates, right, throughout the organization, that if you get on board with integrating these technologies together, it's a stronger voice, right? And it's going to give you alternate channels for funding this technology enablement.
I completely agree, Dan. And, like focusing on those teammates, Zach, over to you for a moment. Collection from those, working with those teammates, like bringing automation there, obviously can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, and I can kind of correlate this back to, the core principles of T-Mobile. We use this internal kind of language. Big C is our real customers, the outside customers, subscribers, et cetera. We also have internal customers. Those are our little C's. My internal customers are my legal department, for example. It might be an application owner who is completing our assessment. And the key part of our Wirewheel automation is that when an app owner says, hey, I want to do this thing, and they go over to the privacy office and they say, okay, great, fill out this privacy impact assessment. We have an automated flow where it actually goes directly to that application owner. They start to look at all the questions that the legal department wants to know, and they're like, oh no, I don't know the answer to this question. They have the ability to assign that question directly to a key SME. Maybe it's a data architect, maybe it's an engineer, maybe it's someone who can actually give the real business context back to complete the question, and then the application owner is again filling out the rest of the questions. And that value is both at the application owner, that little C over there, as well as the legal department doesn't have to go chase things down. The application owner doesn't have to set up a meeting to then talk through things. They can use the platform to fill out the assessment without a lot of overhead and a lot of drag through that process, which has helped us a significant amount in completing our privacy impact assessments.
Well, no, that's again, that core on the ground sort of insight, Zach, is really helpful. And we're now down to about 10 minutes. We've gotten a lot of questions coming in. So I'm going to turn to a few of these, but they're very much what in the spirit of what we've been talking about. So I'm going to paraphrase a few of them. Dimitri, Dan, Zach, do you feel companies need to jump into automation fully with both feet, or can you start small and kind of build incrementally? How do you see folks starting and building their programs that way?
I can start if you guys would like. The answer to that is absolutely no, right? It would be not cost prohibitive, right, to try to automate every single solitary thing in your program, right? But I do think that we've talked about priority areas that provide return on investment, right? Not to belabor them, right? But we talked about your discovery and cataloging capabilities, your ROPA. That's kind of the no-brainer place to start, right? Because if you don't have that right, if you don't have an understanding of what you have, how you're using it, who you're sharing it with, whether you're selling it, where you're sending it to, et cetera, it's almost impossible to do all the other things right. Preference and consent management, individual rights management, cross-border transfer methods, whatever it may be. So starting with that fundamental understanding of data processing, I would say is probably first. And then the other two I mentioned, earlier as well is individual rights, management, and then preference and consent management, I would say is a close third.
Dimitri?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, I don't think there's a much higher risk to trying to pull off a company-wide rollout in the first kind of 5-6 months. I think Zach talked a little bit about scoping down to a certain number of systems as a starting point and really kind of working on perfecting and kind of growing out from there. So look, I think the reality is starting off with 10,000 systems versus 10 systems, it's much less challenging to do a smaller system. And if that has the highest concentration of where you have personal information, you're going to get significant impact and benefit from that. Now, sometimes you don't have that luxury. The reality is, I think as people start looking into all their systems, they have personal data everywhere. But I do think this kind of rolling thunder approach where you start off with a clear set of scopes in phase 1, expand it into phase 2, and further expand it in a later phase is typically the more common scenarios we see at our customers.
And one of the things we've really seen is there's actually a quite broad education on privacy, I think at this point through some of the main organizations. But we see pretty often that there's a pretty significant disconnect on what does it mean to run a privacy program? What are actually the steps you have to do, even in day to day. So for example, Dan, we've all, and Dimitri, Zach, we all say the phrase ROPA. Here's a ROPA. And a ROPA is not, you can't look it up in the dictionary. This is a ROPA, there's no, we often go in a company and you'll say, okay, here's a ROPA, and their ROPA, record of processing, looks very different from what another company's like core ROPA is. So I know we're lucky enough at Spokes to have folks who have joined who are law students and others. Don't worry if some of the language you're hearing sounds like very technical. What we've been talking about so far is when you start and you're getting started with your company or you're coming in to run a privacy program, you're often trying to find what personal data does my company have? And the result of that very high level overview, not down in the weeds like Dimitri was talking, where you're looking at each system, that comes, right? But one of the first challenges you often have is to create what's called this record of processing, which many privacy folks imagine as a list of every one of your major systems and processes, and at least telling you for each one of those, what kinds of data do you have in there? What is it being used for? Who has access to it? And that's what people call a record of processing. And, in WireWheel, we build records of processing. And once you build a record of processing, the next step in running a privacy program is you have to figure out where you have to fix things, right? Building a record of processing often allows you to identify where you have to fix things. It allows you to say, okay, this is a system I need to go deeper on. And going deeper often means you create what's called a privacy impact assessment or a data protection impact assessment if you're covered in Europe. But even this base language that I've just covered and running a privacy program, starting by inventorying your systems, creating a record of processing, finding the data, conducting privacy impact assessments, there's not a standard model out there, and companies do it a lot of different ways. So the privacy automation you may be bringing is just being able to organize the systems, collect the right information, create those records of processing, and doing it in a much more efficient way. So we've seen even the baseline, and Zach, I don't know if you've seen it, when you ask somebody, how do you get started? How do you start to automate? I don't think there's a standard perfectly established way to do it, but there are automation tools that you can bring to it, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think too that the key core component is leveraging industry insights. Contracting with companies, like the Deloitte, who can help us actually identify, well, what is everyone else doing? Because I'll be honest, we did set our sights on let's automate everything. We quickly realized, holy crap, that is a very big effort. So we brought, the experts from Wirewheel and Deloitte into the room and said, okay, what should we really do here? Let's decompose this into its simplest core functions and then build upon that.
Yeah, Zach, just to add on that, and not to sound too consulting cliche, but Justin, it really does start with a privacy tech enablement strategy. For all the reasons that we've talked about, right? There's probably a dozen or more domains that you can technology enable, right? Which ones are a priority, right? For you, given what you just said earlier, right? Most companies can't do a big bang approach, right? It's cost, prohibitive, but you prioritize, the domains and technologies that you want to enable. You prioritize, operational support, needs, for those technologies. You look at business objectives, right? Analytics, advertising, marketing, digital, et cetera, and how those technologies might solve, business benefits versus your own in the privacy, office. All those types of things will factor into, okay, what are we going to prioritize first, second, third? How does that lay out from a sequencing perspective? What are the dependencies? How do I build, on each other, et cetera? So you can pick, one thing and just go. But eventually you're gonna get to the point where you need to look at, things holistically and how you want to lay this out, from a strategic perspective.
No, that's a great way to transition. Then we only have a few minutes here. So I'm going to ask the big picture question for all four of us. And I'll start with you, Dimitri, then we'll go you, Dan, you, Zach, and we'll come back to me. What's your view of the future? So when we think about automation, where this is all going, where do we think what'll this look like, say, in 5 years, Dimitri? Where will we be headed?
Yeah, so look, I think automation, history has told us, is wherever you have a spreadsheet, you replace it with some degree of automation, right? I think Salesforce itself is an example of that. And I think ServiceNow, every great business started by replacing either Office, Word documents, or spreadsheets. So in a similar vein, I think there's going to be further automation in privacy. It's going to be connected to the data, but I think more and more people are going to see data as that critical kind of linchpin in understanding not just your customer, but your business in terms of delivering on something that Dan talked about at the very beginning around data ethics and privacy preferences. So I think more and more companies want to be able to deliver on the vision of privacy, which is this transparency and ethical use of data, which of course is going to mean that they need to be able to account for their data and use it to solve particular, whether the regulator requirements or requirements back to the consumer or back to the employee or to the partner. So I think automation is here to stay, right? None of us use fire anymore, or we move beyond that with light bulbs. And in a similar vein, that's going to continue in this. And I think, again, looking at data as that kind of linchpin and being able to both de-risk it, ensure compliance with it, and get value from it is going to be something that you see carried over the course of the next 2020, 2021, 2022.
Very thoughtful, Dimitri. Dan?
Yeah, a lot of similar thoughts, Dimitri. I would say I don't see the technology enablement train slowing down anytime soon. As like I said earlier, CCPA-like laws proliferate across the U.S., GDPR-like laws proliferate globally. The volumes are just going to become, unsustainable to have these things running in an unstructured document type of world. At the same time, I could easily see the vendor technology landscape starting to consolidate, right? The cream rising to the crop. We're seeing dozens, hundreds of vendors, come out and try to solve, this problem. I think we'll see some shrinking or consolidation like we have in other cybersecurity domains. Second thing I see is the use of more co-sourcing or outsourcing for privacy operational support types of tasks. I've seen organizations hiring literally dozens of people to handle individual rights requests, execute DPIAs, et cetera. Those things are going to become more and more transactional, right? And it might be cost beneficial, right? From a cost reduction perspective, we talked about earlier, like return on investment, to use co-sourcing or outsourcing partners for that type of stuff to lower your costs, lower the burden on your business units and business functions, decrease the need for a mammoth, size privacy office, et cetera. Third thing I see is a continued proliferation of laws, regulations, and standards. That's not going anywhere. They're always going to trail business and technology innovation. We're always going to have to live with it, but it's never going to stop. I do think that there's going to be an increased focus on data ethics and consumer trust versus compliance, and those that do are going to win, right? Not win from a privacy perspective. They're going to win in the marketplace because that's what consumers demand. And then the last piece I touched on earlier is because this whole world is moving towards artificial intelligence and machine learning, I can definitely see organizations start to use AI and ML associated with privacy, data to inform their approach towards their consumers, if that makes sense.
It does, Dan. Well, look forward to working with you on this over the next few years as well. And Zach, what do you think? What does it look like in the next few years?
I think there's going to be a huge drive towards simplification. Retention will definitely become a spotlight item. Companies will continue to address data retention, not keeping data around for 10, 20 plus years. And then the usage, when we have complex strategies of here's this new shiny tool that's in the marketplace, let's go try to use that for this new, advanced analytical procedure to market to individuals. It's going to put some brakes on that. There might be leveraging your existing platforms in lieu of going out and replicating the data 15 times. I think that's going to be one of the core focuses is data retention and really looking at how we're using data and minimizing the risk. Back to what Dan was talking about, the trust principle. If we've got who knows what kind of information out there, and we've got everybody and their brother who has access to it, it's not something that the consumer wants to hear.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with you completely, Zach. And if I'm looking at the same set of questions that I asked, I see two major things 5 years from now. One, and this is why we're focused on the customer experience from privacy, and then the privacy office, building on what all three of you have said. I think 5 years from now, customers will just expect that their experience with a company on their own data is simple, unified, and they actually can understand what happened, where it went, and they can say no. They can say, I want my data back and I want it deleted, as simply as that. I don't think they're going to tolerate going to 5 or 6 different sources. I don't think human beings around the earth are going to tolerate doing business with a company that they don't understand what's happening to their information. I just don't think that's going to work. And so unification and simplification of the experience from a privacy perspective, I think is going to drive a lot of it. And we, obviously are focused on that. That can be consent, that can be DSAR, but it's just the whole thing altogether. And the second is, I think the more that our privacy offices, to what Dimitri and Dan and Zach have been talking about, the more that we are synchronized with the data and the data models, I use that generically, data models that your company is using for their business purposes, that's going to bring a huge benefit to our privacy professionals. Because I see too often, there's just a lack of synchronization between all the work that's been done to organize your data for business purposes. And then we're reinventing the wheel on the privacy side, and it creates a tremendous amount of work. So the more that we can synchronize those two, and you don't have to ask what data do I have or how am I organizing it, you can build off of what your data team or your business team is doing. I think that'll really make the privacy world a lot more simple. So I know, look, we probably could talk for a lot longer. I always enjoy the conversations with all three of you. Let me say on behalf of the entire community, thank you for donating your time. Yeah, Dimitri, I know, has a very high speaker's fee at this point. So, but we set up spokes to bring kind of the best knowledge from real experts on this to the whole community. You've seen we've had a great amount of participation. Really enjoyed the conversation, Zach, Dan, Dimitri. I hope you'll join us at Spokes 2021 as well. from a bookkeeping, here's next. We have a phenomenal panel of VC investors covering how they look at the space. I think it'll build very much on our conversation. And then we have a wonderful keynote later on from Congressman Jamie Raskin on focusing on civil rights and human rights in this time of crisis. I hope you join us. For the rest of us, thank you for joining us at Spokes, Dimitri, Dan, and Zach. And look forward to seeing you soon.
Good seeing everybody. Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.